Hey everyone and welcome. Today in this explainer, we are going to unpack the massive 2007 Bangladesh cholera outbreak. But we're not just going to sit here and recite facts at you. Instead, we're looking at this event entirely through the lens of the hazard-risk equation. Our goal today is to understand exactly how a physical natural hazard directly triggers a major disease outbreak. Nailing this connection is absolutely crucial if you're looking to secure those top-tier A-star marks for your OCR disease dilemma specification. So let's get into it. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by breaking down the 2007 Bangladesh floods, then look at the environmental drivers of the disease, human vulnerability and spread, quantifying the outbreak's impact, and finally, the strategies used to minimize the disease.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the 2007 Bangladesh floods.
2/3. I want you to really just picture that for a second. An estimated 2/3 of Bangladesh's entire landmass was submerged beneath floodwaters. I mean, this wasn't just a localized, small-scale event. This was a nationwide inundation that upended the lives of millions and literally altered the physical landscape almost overnight.
So how did this happen? Well, a crucial part of your A-level analysis is connecting the physical geography to the flooding event itself. Bangladesh sits right on a vast, low-lying delta formed by the mighty Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers. Back in 2007, they faced this devastating combination of heavy, intense monsoon rainfall and a dramatic increase in Himalayan snowmelt surging through those rivers. The rivers just completely overwhelmed their channels, they spilled out and submerged these rural, low-lying deltaic plains where drainage is historically pretty poor and the population density is incredibly high.
That brings us to Section 2, environmental drivers of disease.
Before we go any further, we really need to clearly define our main threat here, Vibrio cholerae. This is the causative bacterial agent of cholera. What's absolutely vital to understand, and to include in your essays, is that this bacteria naturally thrives in stagnant water. So when those massive floodwaters finally stopped moving and just stagnated across the plains, they created this perfect nutrient-rich breeding ground. The bacteria just rapidly multiplied, basically waiting to enter the human water supply.
And we can actually see two different environmental threats working in tandem here. On one side, you have the climate factors, the heavy monsoons creating those vast, stagnant breeding grounds. But compounding that was the sheer physical destruction of infrastructure. The floods actively wiped out water treatment plants and severely damaged water pipelines. This meant millions of people were suddenly cut off from clean drinking water, practically forcing them to drink untreated, contaminated floodwater just to survive. And that triggers what we call the food insecurity cascade. This is a really crucial indirect linkage to understand. First, the physical floodwaters sweep through and destroy vital crops and livestock. Unsurprisingly, this inevitably leads to widespread local food shortages. Then, populations suffering from malnutrition experience severely weakened immune systems. This dramatically increases their physical susceptibility to infectious diseases like cholera. So you can see how the environmental destruction indirectly, yet incredibly powerfully, amplified the health threat.
Let's shift our focus a bit in Section 3, human vulnerability and spread.
So, here is a question I want you to think about. Why did the disease spread so rapidly once it started? Exploring the specific interaction between human behavior and a hazardous environment is where the real, high-level geographical analysis lies. Keep this in the back of your mind as we go through these next few factors. While several key human factors essentially acted as an amplifier for this crisis. First off, Bangladesh has an extremely high population density, which just naturally facilitates rapid person-to-person transmission. Plus, remember those floods? They caused the widespread destruction of latrines and basic sanitation facilities, which unfortunately led to a massive increase in open defecation. This created a direct pathway for fecal contamination of the primary water sources. Combine all of that with the fact that in 2007, national immunization coverage for cholera was very uneven, leaving vast swaths of the population totally unprotected. It was basically a recipe for disaster. Take a close look at this number right here, 114,747. That is the exact number of displaced individuals who were forced into just 401 government emergency shelters. When you pack that many terrified, displaced people into temporary accommodations, severe overcrowding is just unavoidable. And in these highly concentrated, stressful spaces, poor hygiene skyrockets the disease risk. It acted as a massive catalyst for the explosive spread of cholera. Now let's look at the hard data in Section 4, quantifying the outbreak's impact.
While up to 33 million people were affected overall during the full course of the disaster, this specific UNICEF report from August 27th gives us an incredibly detailed snapshot of the devastation right at a critical peak. We see 10.5 million people immediately affected, 615 tragic deaths recorded at that exact point in time, and massive social disruption with over 4,600 primary schools affected. Memorizing a few of these specific, hard statistics is a fantastic way to anchor your geographical argument in reality.
And this breakdown brilliantly illustrates a really important, almost surprising nuance about natural disasters. While cholera and diarrhea were these massive, terrifying threats, the immediate physical hazard of drowning actually claimed the vast majority of lives initially, 543 out of those 615 early deaths. This really highlights a key concept. During a hazard event, the direct physical impacts often hit first, while the disease dilemmas follow closely behind as a deadly secondary wave. Speaking of that secondary wave, prolonged exposure to heavily polluted water resulted in tens of thousands of infections. Severe diarrhea led the count massively at nearly 69,000 cases, heavily driven by the cholera pathogen causing rapid dehydration. But we also see over 17,000 cases of skin diseases and respiratory infections. This toxic flood environment just caused a huge spectrum of severe public health issues.
Of course, we also can't ignore the severe social and economic impacts. Over 4,400 primary schools were completely closed, entirely halting education for kids, and almost 300 were repurposed as emergency shelters. On top of this massive educational disruption, there was a devastating loss of livelihoods because livestock died and cash crops were completely washed away. The entire socioeconomic fabric of these rural communities was essentially torn apart, which made long-term recovery incredibly difficult.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, Strategies to Minimize Disease.
Let's compare how different groups actually tried to mitigate this. At the national level, the Bangladesh government really focused on local distribution. They were setting up emergency treatment centers, handing out oral rehydration solution packets, distributing chlorine tablets to purify water, and launching vital public hygiene campaigns. In tandem with that, international groups like UNICEF and the WHO provided the heavy-duty support. We're talking medical personnel, mobile water treatment plants, emergency high-protein food, and crucial assistance in repairing those core water and sanitation systems that were destroyed.
I really want to highlight this specific demographic insight from UNICEF. They explicitly noted an increased vulnerability among women and children. This emphasizes exactly why both short-term emergency relief and long-term structural repairs are absolutely vital. The most marginalized groups always suffer the most during these hazard events, right? So your mitigation strategies must be specifically tailored to protect those highly vulnerable populations.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. How can understanding the intersection of physical hazards and human vulnerability actually prevent the next major disease dilemma? Mastering the intricate, complex relationship between a hazardous environment and the people who live there is the absolute key to an A-star analysis. Think deeply about how factors like future climate change might alter this equation going forward. Thank you so much for joining me in this deep dive. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.